Like a 6-hour rain delay or something. My
They
buddy-
said, they showed some pictures, and it was pouring down there.
My buddy said, because they were there for the whole thing, they sat in the box and just stayed. He's like, well, we're just going to sit inside and watch football somewhere.
Right,
So
you got
we
TV
stayed.
as well, right.
He said it rained like 4 inches an hour.
They said nothing but
You
the
couldn't
rain.
see anything.
Honestly.
Our UPS guy went to Penn State. He's a graduate at Penn State. He went to the Penn State game that weekend.
Oh,
He
okay.
won.
Well, good morning.
Morning.
Big time Penn State guy.
So announcements, our community dinner is the 27th, which is not this Wednesday, but the next weekend, and it's spaghetti and pasta dinner. So the sign up is on the back podium if you could sign up to help with supplies for that. And homecoming is 2 weeks from today on the 1st as well. So other than that, I think that was it. So we can all bow our heads for prayer. Start. Dear Lord, thank you for this beautiful morning. Thank you for bringing us together in your house. Please lead us through your service and bring us closer to you and your Son. In your Son Jesus we pray. Amen. So, what's that? How about page 358, Because He Lives?
Yeah.
We could all please stand.
morning.
Morning.
Good to see you. Morning.
Now, were those sales, were those cows bred or were they old?
Hi, Bill. Good to see you.
I think what's sale?
The one, the last one, the one in Texas.
Oh, that was me.
Okay, well, the one, there was a cow sitting there. I kind of strolled with the pigs, I'm more interested in the cattle. so.
Most of those cows would be fall cows.
Okay.
Early cattle. Most of them would be like round.
Are they going well?
Are you gonna go back to the little room?
Yeah, it's
I mean,
it's so high. I saw the future of the back cattle. My buddy sent me a couple of days ago. Futures in the
Not right
spring
now.
are like $1.90.
we'll see.
Good morning, sir. How are you? Thanks.
Okay.
Morning.
Good morning. Really happy to hear that.
That's right.
I thought about you yesterday.
You and your lady. You want to choke somebody?
Yeah. Yeah. Good morning.
Morning.
How are you?
That's a great number, great
Pull your fingers apart. Take away your fingers. I take away. Got it. Yeah, look, there's your finger.
Yeah.
It's a big one. Yeah. They got an ouch on it. Good morning. Good morning.
Go by. Hello. Hello. Too slow. Did Tim get your wolf or your fox? Did Tim get it? I'm gonna get your fox. Get your fox. Get your fox. You know what though? Because her legs are so long, they look great on her. Yes, they do. They make me look much shorter.
In a perfect
Almost perfect life this morning.
Thanks
And I walked in and like,
Yeah, he just
oh yeah.
You can handle it.
Oh, I've been through it.
All right. Can't wait.
pretty good. They're not as good as I thought they were.
What's on your shirt?
It also means I didn't think they would lose.
But I mean, I was just surprised.
What's in here?
What's in here?
To go to surgery. That's the
Good morning. How are you?
No. She worked Friday and Saturday. She's off today.
Do we have a song of choice?
You're happy this morning.
Yeah.
Catch that?
Oh, yeah, I got it all.
Yeah, there's sometimes they'll say a complete sentence that you understand, and then it breaks off and goes,
Anybody looking for a song? Violet, you got a song? You looking? You can pick two, Violet. It's okay. Even eighth graders can pick. 494. Get to the miracle.
Junior's got a big birthday next week.
Prayers and praises.
We need to remember Sharon
Yeah.
and the family of Marty McCoy.
Okay. She passed away.
Yes, she did.
And the family of Ann Lofton.
Okay.
And Barbara is their blood.
And Haley McIntyre.
Toby Cooper and his family. And Mickey had, I think, his electromagnetic imaging last Thursday. I don't know the results.
Okay.
He had an MRI before, and it was also inconclusive, but they didn't do the contract, which they were supposed to do, so he's getting that done tomorrow.
Sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah. That pounded in your head.
Yeah. Mm.
Pray for the leaders.
Maybe we'll have her being too cut back in.
Mm. Okay.
She can't figure out how to swallow and breathe at the same time. So, yeah, so.
Anybody else? All right, we all bow our heads and pray. Who, Dave Bond? Dear Lord, thank you again for this wonderful morning. Thanks for carrying us, and being with us each and every day. We sometimes take it for granted, and after Sunday school lessons, sometimes the ordinary. But we know you're there each and every day to care for us and watch over us. Please take these people in your hands and help carry them, help Sharon and her procedures and what she's got going on health. Please be with the Marty McCoy family and the Ann Lofton family and their losses. Please be with them as they grieve. Please help Barbara Jane and her stomach bug and help her to feel better. Also be with Bill and Nancy and Janet throughout each day. Please be with Haley McIntyre and the baby and help them to continue to grow and get stronger. Be with Cody Cooper and the family, as well as Mickey with his continued testing and hopefully the results come back positive as well. Be with Dave Bond, watch over him and his health, as well as be with Tricia and working with him. Also be with baby Willow, help her to get stronger each day and figure out how to function and get stronger and grow. Please hold her in your hand each and every day. Please be with all those first responders, our leaders, all those who are there in public service to help us and keep us safe and lead us in directions. Watch over them, the decisions they make, help them to make them in your name. Watch over us each and every day as we go through the week. In the name of your Son, Jesus, we pray. Amen. And we got BA bringing sharing time, and Doug will be following the message.
Morning, everyone.
Morning.
Appropriately so. Suzanne, I walk in and she says, "Oh, I can't wait to hear you this morning." I was like, "Oh yeah, that's right." Yep. So and it was just, it's perfect. It's so fitting. That's why I'm up here smirking as I speak. I got a call Wednesday, right? This is randomness. You guys are gonna have to, you'll be busy keeping up with all this, but that is my life at times, or most of the time. I got a call Wednesday from the National Swine Registry. They're having a special sale in Georgia. Last minute decided they wanted internet bidding. One of my gals was in a wedding, and I had to go hang out with you Purdue fans yesterday, so she wasn't available. Another, I don't know. So lo and behold, the one Saturday that I had kept open on my calendar, I didn't have anything this weekend. I was like, I'm going to hang out. I'm going to have a weekend at home. Well, there went that idea. So they call Wednesday. I booked a flight Thursday. And when I booked the flight, there was a chance I could get on this 10:30 flight, get home at midnight. I was like, man, it'd be nice to sleep in my bed. Totally forgetting that it had been properly and continuously communicated to me that today was my day to be up here. Right? So I did it, because I'm like, well, that'll be good. I can go to church Sunday. I want to get home and do that. Lo and behold, fast forward, I walk in, and Suzanne reminds me that I'm up front, which is, believe it or not, one of the few things I'm actually prepared for. Why is that? Because it wasn't thinking, and I was moving so fast a couple months ago that prepared me for this. You talked about taking for granted the ordinary in your prayer this morning as the baseline of what I got right here. It's just funny how you tie all these things together. So like June and July, South Dakota, week in Montana, just everywhere, just wide open. Throwing county fair right in the middle of that, 4 consecutive weekends at state fair, all that stuff happened this summer, which has been great. They've all been blessings. But in the middle of that, so I was scheduled to be up here in July, which was the Sunday right after county fair, in the middle of all that, which got pushed aside because of the Western Yearly Meeting. Is that right? Well, again, the guy that's going 100 miles an hour in 50 different directions got up Sunday morning, and I'm like, I'm running late, but if I hustle, I can get to church. Just, again, running so fast, not thinking about everything going on in day-to-day life. Just, boom, I come in. As soon as I come underneath the bridge, there's no cars. Oh, that's right. You were going to be up, which you had forgotten about, and you were going to be here, but now there's Western. So it's empty church. And I was like, well, I can't. It's too late to go there, so I'm going to go in church. I'm just going to sit there for a minute. So I walk in, and of course, this place, there's no one here. It is quiet. And so I sat here, my mind's going a million miles an hour, right? You can slow the body, but it's the mind that you can't pace. And you know for sure. I know if you're doing this, you get it. And so I sat here for 10 minutes. I sat right back there in the general area where I typically would. And I just couldn't get slowed down. I couldn't get slowed down. And I was like, all right, well, I'm just going to try to sit here for 10 or 15 minutes because this is finally some quiet and peace. I'm going to really focus on it. So I stole this piece of paper. And I was just sitting there with a piece of paper for about 10 minutes. And I finally started to slow down. I'm like, okay, how do I take something from this? There's too much opportunity in this quiet church and just me. And there's a piece of this that I don't have in life often enough. Next thing I know, once I got to scratch on this piece of paper, I looked up and it was 11:45. And so it was really, really good. And so this has been pinned back there on the cork board since July. I folded up when I finished, and I knew there was something in here to share with everybody. And it's because this church, right? You drive by, it's an empty brick building, 6 days, 6.5 days a week, right? But within that hour, there was a lot more in this empty building all by myself, and it was the quiet, it was the peace. And I think, one of the things I struggled with, I continue to struggle a little bit with, I've really come to grips with is how I measure success in life and your priorities and things of that nature. And ultimately decided along the way what I've worked on is peace in life, right? If you have all the money, you have all the hustle, whatever those numbers and whatever those things are, all the material things, but if you're not at peace when you lay your head down at night, if you're not pausing to think about the things we take for granted in the ordinary, then you've missed it. And while I'm 44 years old, I've looked back at the last decade and I've done all these neat things. I really have. I've been blessed more than I could have ever imagined. But I've thought about, are you soaking it in while you're taking this big, fast ride? And some days I have, a lot of days I hadn't. And in the midst of all the chaos was a lack of peace in many instances. And so I'm not going to read this to you because it wouldn't mean anything to you guys and gals specifically. But I just started writing things down with bullet points and what came off of there, and some of the categories, if you will. Right, there was nothing structured. It was just all this chaos up here and trying to get on paper in order to slow down and embrace the things in the ordinary that we take for granted every day. And I started thinking like friends, and I listed the number of states that I have significant acquaintances and friendships in, which is mind-blowing. And then right next to that, I wrote church. Those were the two things. I put the number of states, I counted them up one by one, and it was close to, I was like 40, over 40. And then I just wrote church next to that because of the friendships and the support I've gained from this quiet little brick building. Health, I just put a check, right? Other than the extra Twinkies and ho-hos, everything's pretty well in line. And you take for granted, right? You just do. I went to lunch the other day, and from Avon, there was this team of 4 or 5 ladies with special needs. There was about a dozen kids, probably teenagers, maybe 12, 15 of them at lunch, and you just looked around, right? Nothing has to be said. Again, it's the ordinary, right? That I got in the truck, that I woke up in a home today, and that I was fed and clothed, and I got into a truck, and I drove here and had the health to do it, had the resource to do it, and been blessed to do those things. You do what I do in life, right? Well, that's with your free time or things of that nature. You know, again, some of these are all very self-serving because these are things I've been blessed with. But the categories of achievements in life, right? Family, friends, places you've gone, experiences you've seen, cultures you've learned about. Reflection was one. Those that all made it possible. Right, and I got just sub-points. Again, this is just chaos in my mind is how it all started. But because of this quiet little brick building, I was able to slow down and think about the things we take for granted. And when you get going so fast and somebody throws you a curveball, whether it's fair or unfair, right? Life's largely unfair to our standards for all of us. But caught up in that mess, you know, I sat down here on that day, again, travel, experiences, things I've done, learning from others, right? Whether that's business, whether that's our livestock, think about all the neat, just dining experiences, all the neat stuff I've gotten to do. And the last one I wrote, and this is one I've really tried to focus on, gratitude. And I wrote, and I wanted to go back, I haven't looked at this since I wrote in July, with gratitude, and then I wrote this moment, and I underlined it twice. Mm-hmm. Right, and again, I started out forgetting that it was Western Yearly Meeting, forgetting I was originally supposed to be up front in church of a bunch of empty pews, writing this. Some of the old school livestock people, mentors who helped me do the things I enjoy. And how appropriate, I was basically flying at just a half gear slower as I planned the plane ticket to get here this morning, after properly being communicated many times. Just totally slipped right through my mind. I was supposed to be up here this morning. And I think it's an opportunity. You know, I've made it a habit for about 6 months now. No matter what's happened in the day, the last thing that goes through my brain is a moment of gratitude. And I read that somewhere, and it doesn't heal, it doesn't fix everything, but if the last thing that goes to your brain before you attempt to go to sleep at night is literally 15 seconds of just reflecting on the ordinary. And we lose sight of that, and it's amazing. And I know I'm not casting rocks, I don't mean to speak for everyone here today, but just the basics and the fundamentals, the people in this room, the quiet brick building, right? I listened to a video the other day of a guy who was teaching Christianity over in Asia. And he talked about how some of those folks, like they sat on the floor of a wooden boat and traveled 3 days across the water to have this meeting. And he talked about how there were 23 people there were 30-some people in the crowd that he was visiting with that day, and 23 of them had served jail or prison time because they had been caught by the government grouping up in Christianity and having prayer. And they talked about how they wouldn't allow them to have Bibles in church, or Bibles in jail, excuse me. And so people would take and write out the Bible verses on paper so that they could mail them in so that they could read and study. And then he enlightened them, and he started comparing. He said, you guys went 3 days on the wooden floor of a boat to get here for 3 days of this. He's like, if our church pews aren't padded, we don't go. He says, if we go over 45 minutes with a sermon, we start to lose them. In perspective of that, right, the things that we have the right to gather today, right, next to your spouse or loved one, you didn't have to get approval from anyone to come here today. We all came, and we get to leave here without judgment from others, right, without having to get the permission slip, without fear that literally there may be troops come through the door and break up our congregation or meeting today. And so I share all that and randomness with you because again, I was going 100 miles an hour, and I took that piece of paper out of the notebook, and I knew at some point there'd be an opportunity to share you guys and gals that we could, whether it's in the truck, having a sandwich by yourself at lunch, just turn the phone off for 10 minutes, and maybe it's that last 30 seconds when your head hits the pillow every night, just that quick blurb to kind of put things in perspective. So, thank you.
Well, good morning. VA, thank you for the intro this morning, and a vivid reminder Jesus in Matthew 11:28 says, "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. So take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly at heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." And I was thinking this morning, as I got up this morning, of just a reminder amongst the chaos of everything that VA describes, that there's a God. There's a God that created the world. There's a God that intricately made us and put us in relation with others. And all he desires is a relationship with us. He desires to know us. In Psalm 19, you think about the ordinary and you think about, how does he do this? Right? Well, you get frustrated because you don't see him, right? You don't see him working the way that you think he should work in your life. And Psalm 19 tells us, verse 1, the heavens declare the glory of God, and the sky above proclaims his handiwork. Day to day pours out speech, and night to night reveal knowledge. There is no speech, nor are there words whose voice is not heard. And you just see God in everything around us. There's a guy that used to work with me that he's like, I wish God would just come and just tell me that it's real. Tell me that it's here. And I'm like, you're not looking for the right places. Let's go outside and we watch the sun come up. And tell me how that happens. Stop and just look. So verse 7, we're going to skip down, and verse 7 says, the law of the Lord is perfect, reviving the soul. The testimony of the Lord is sure, making wise the simple. The precepts of the Lord are right, rejoicing the heart. The commandment of the Lord is pure, enlightening the eyes. And I think, how does God tell us that he's real? How does God tell us that he's out here? Yes, he pours it out through nature. He gives it to us in his word. And then lastly, he tells us, let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in your sight. O Lord, my rock and my redeemer. He gives us the ability to share. He puts us in groups. He puts us in community where we can talk to others about him. And how many days, and again, you think of the craziness of your day and how things go, and if you just stop and listen to what God has for you in that moment. And there's so much, right? And he's telling us, he's begging us to come to me, all who are weak and weary, and I will give you rest. And so many times we just go on right by. But he calls to us, and I think about how has he revealed to us through his word, and we've been studying through the book of Genesis, and this study has been awesome for me, and just understanding how it all works together. And if you look at Genesis and how the foundations of the earth have been formed, and now we're starting to get into how the foundation of the nation of Israel were formed, so that we can see how the foundations of Jesus Christ are formed and how he can redeem the whole world. And all of this is being done. And we got into Abram and we're starting to learn more. And the thing that has really struck me is what did Abram do? What did Abram do to deserve God calling the whole nation of Israel and really the whole world? What did Abram do? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. And it is so hard for me, a guy who's been, who am I? Well, I work hard at this, and I do this, and I do that. And what God is telling us is nothing you can do. It is all by me. And God working through this one man of Abram and his relationship and his response to God, and God working with and through his fallen creation, his imperfect people. We learned about Abram, telling the Pharaoh of Egypt that, well, this is my sister, not my wife. And we're going to get to see, not this week, but in a few weeks, we're going to get to hear about the next fumble that Abram has. But he works through his fallen creation, but yet we were created in his image. And then by his grace, we were allowed to come to him. It's just crazy how even all the way back to Abram, we see God working just consistently through time. And he's still doing it today. With the Abrahamic covenant, so thinking big picture still about where we are in this, the Abrahamic covenant of God focused on one man and his descendants and the channel for bringing blessings to families of the earth. Again, we talk about, the foundation of Israel, and then you see Jesus come through the nation of Israel and then bless everyone through that. And another related theme that works through all of these stories that we're going to be seeing and working through is the heightened conflict between good and evil. And we've been focusing on that since we've really kind of started through this. And while God's blessings provide the good gift of life and fertility within the fulfillment of the promises, the curse and its effects are a constant reminder of evil. And this evil takes many forms in the narratives, but the most pronounced is the form and theme of deception that frequently threatens the program of blessing. Another form of evil takes is conflict between people. And deception, conflict, we don't see much of that today, right? And that frequently threatens the program of blessing. Another form is the foreign armies, the pagan, all the different worshiping of idols, and the selfish relatives, the selfish things that we all do. And it's just, there's nothing new. And you see God working through all of this. But yet, because we get frustrated and we see, we ask the question, why would God allow? Why does this happen? Why does this? Well, it's because of the fall in Genesis chapter 3. And then we see it in the life of Abraham so quickly. The nation of Israel could see themselves in the person of Abraham facing the same kinds of tensions and learning to persevere in their faith. Right? So Moses is revealing the story of Genesis to the nation of Israel, and he's teaching them. Right? He's teaching them, and he kind of sees them, and he shows them to learn to persevere in their faith. So we go back to, what is God teaching us through his creation? We go through, what is God teaching us through his word? It's going to be hard. In this life you will have tribulations, but take heart, I have overcome the world. And you see that all the way back here. If you remember back 2 weeks ago, we ended with the question of, how do I respond to what God is revealing to me? I mean, B.A. talked of his time in here and the time he spent with God, and then what do? God reveals and shows me this. Now what am I going to do with it? How am I going to go and live my life? And as we get to this chapter 14 and 15 today, we see how Abram responds to some of the challenges that come to him. And again, learning to persevere in our faith through these different challenges, and that's what we see Abraham doing here today. So let's go into Genesis chapter 14. So in Genesis chapter 14, it starts out, if you remember where we were, in 13, 12 and 13, Abram goes and he deceives Egypt, and now he's coming out of Egypt, and they have so much stuff, he and Lot have to separate, and they go on their different ways. You see the Lord promising to Abram the land, all that he sees, the Lord promises him that. And you see Abram's response there at the end, and there he built an altar to the Lord. Right? And then time goes on, and you see in verse 14, there's several kings. So there's a group of kings who have oppressed another group of kings, and they've been paying these kings every so often. Well, they did this for 12 years, and in the 13th year, they're like, all right, we're done with this. We're not going to do this anymore. So the 13th year, this group says, no, we're not going to do that anymore. So the 14th year, the kings come and make them pay the price, right? So you see this battle develop around, and you see that's kind of going on all around Abram and Lot and where they're at. So if you go all the way down to 14 verse 11, we're going to read 11 through 16. It says, so the enemy So you see this defeat, the kings that were oppressing actually defeat those that aren't, and you see this. So the enemy took all of the possessions of Sodom and Gomorrah and all their provisions and went their way. They also took Lot, the son of Abram's brother, who was dwelling in Sodom, and his possessions, and went their way. So remember, in verse 13, or in chapter 13, Sodom is referred to as a very wicked people. Right? And now we see here that Lot, all of a sudden, was living in Sodom. Right? So you're like, uh-oh. So then he gets drawn into this battle, and he gets taken away as part of the spoils of the victory. So he's captured and he's being taken away. So then in verse 13 we read, Then one who had escaped came and told Abram the Hebrew, who was living by the oaks of Mamre, the Amorite, brother of Eshcol and of Aner. These were the allies of Abram. When Abram heard that his kinsman had been taken captive, he led forth his trained men, born in his house, 318 of them, and went in pursuit as far as Dan. And he divided his forces against them by night, he and his servants, and defeated them and pursued them to Hobah, north of Damascus. Then he brought back all the possessions, and also brought back his kinsman Lot, his possessions, and the women and the people. So if you look at a map and how this all goes down, it's about 150. It's hard to guess, but 150 to 200 miles from where Abram is to where the actual battle, and he gets them. So this is a big deal, and he's taken all these guys, and we don't know a lot of the details of the battle, but and I think that's for purpose, right? Because God's wanting to show him that he is the one that overcomes, right? There's only 318 against these 5 kings that have just been through all this battle and all the spoil, and there's only 318 that go with Abram to get Lot back. And we see him capture, and it says, it's interesting, then he brought back all the possessions and also brought back his kinsman Lot with his possessions. So think of all of these guys, all of the spoils of war, right? And he's got those. So in verse 17, after his return from the defeat of, this is part of the reason I didn't read all of these kings. After his defeat of Kedorlaomer and the kings who were with him, the king of Sodom went out to meet him at the valley of Shavah. That is the king's valley. And Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was a priest of the God Most High. And he blessed him and said, Blessed be Abraham by God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, and blessed be God Most High, and who has delivered your enemies into your hand. And Abram gave him 1/10 of everything. And the king of Sodom said to Abram, Give me the persons, but take the goods for yourself. So again, there's two. Hang on there. But Abram said to the king of Sodom, I have lifted my hand to the Lord, God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, that I would not take a thread of our sandal strap or anything that is yours, lest you say, I have made Abram rich. I will take nothing but what the young men have eaten and the share of men who went with me. Let Aner, Eshcol, and Mamre take their share. So you see this aftermath of this great victory, right? He captured all the spoils, he's bringing it back, he's got Lot and his family, and he's bringing it back. Then 2 kings came out to meet Abram on his return from the battle. And they're very different kings. The king of Sodom, remember, is very wicked. And then this king of Melchizedek, the king of Salem, whose very name suggests that he was righteous in how he ruled, who occupied the office of priest. great, in chapter 13:13, it talks about Sodom as great sinners against the Lord. But Melchizedek is referred to as the priest of the God Most High. So it's interesting we see these two kings come out and meet Abram as he's on his way back. Melchizedek was the one person that Abram recognized as his spiritual superior. And he so accepted the blessing from him and paid him tithes. He knew that both the victory, okay, this is the important part. He knew that both the victory and the blessing came from God. That must not in any way be tarnished through the offer from the king of Sodom. God gave victory over military enemies who plundered the promised land. Abram, under the blessing of God, defeated military enemies who plundered the promised land. So God delivered them and gave victory, right? And Abram recognized that, and he gave the glory to God, not to himself, not to the spoils. God gives, so you can kind of think through, we talk about the nation of Israel, and we talk about Christ. So you think about, so Abram, under the blessing of God, defeated the military enemies. Well, you could also say, think about who the context of Genesis is being written to. God gives Israel, his chosen race, victory in accordance with the promises of Abram over enemies who plunder the promised land. The Israelites could see that Abram represented the nation and that God, who chose Abram and gave him a blessing of the land and the nation, was the real subject of the victory. This message, you think about the message that Moses has given the Israelites, this message would have encouraged God's people in times of battle, in the period of the judges and the monarchy, and looking back and reflecting of God's provisions through these battles, right? The words of Melchizedek, so we see in verse 19, are really the central part of the passage. Blessed be Abram by God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, and blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand. The realization that both the victory over the world and the promised blessings came from God. God alone enables the believers to discern the danger of accepting worldly benefits and to wait for the untarnished blessing. So we get blessings in our life, right? And that's what he said. We get these blessings in our life, and you puff your chest and you say, look how great of things I have done. When the blessings from God, and recognizing they are from God, as Abram did. So we'll go on in chapter 15. There's a lot we could talk through and say around Melchizedek, because it's referred to, you see him referred to several times in the New Testament. And there's a lot we could say there. But we'll keep going. In chapter 15, after these things, again, so just moving through Abram's life. After these things, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. Fear not, Abram, I am your shield. Your reward shall be very great. But Abram said, I always wonder I come back to, I said this last time too, how did this look? What does Abram's day-to-day look like? You look at, your day-to-day and what it looks like. And time goes by and then you see God come to Abram and say, fear not, Abram, I am your shield. Your reward shall be very great. Remember that Abram was 75 years old when God called him. Time's ticking. And God keeps promising me that I'm going to have this great nation is going to be founded through me, right? So that's what you see here with Abram. But Abram said, O Lord God, what will you give me? For I continue childless, and the heir of my house is Eleazar of Damascus. And Abram said, Behold, you have given me no offspring, and a member of my household will be my heir. So you see Abram kind of calling, Lord, you promised this, but what have you given me? In verse 4 it says, and behold, the word of the Lord came to him. This man shall not be your heir. Your very own son shall be your heir. And he brought him outside and said, so remember where we started in Psalm 19, the heavens declare. So in verse 5 he says, and he brought him outside and said, look toward heaven and the number of stars, if you are able to number them. Then he said to him, so shall your offspring be. And he believed the Lord, and he counted it to him as righteousness. So we see Abram just struggling with not having any children. That's his legacy. That's where this is all going, right? And then you see the word of the Lord come to him, and he doesn't, when God talks to him, he doesn't reference Eliezer. He just references this man, but he reassures Abram, your very own son shall be your heir, and leads him outside and shows him the stars. The other thing to remember is in chapter 13, God told him similar, right? But in 13, God compared him to the dust of the earth to convey the abundance of the promise, and also to call for greater faith from the one who is childless. He's kind of, stay with me. I got this, right? I got a better plan. And he's telling him the nation will be as many as the stars in the heavens. So then in verse 6 is a reference. Many references in the New Testament come back to verse 6. And he believed the Lord, and he counted it to him as righteousness. So the verse reinforces what we have seen before, is the faith of Abram. So Abram doesn't come to faith here, but we see this again, that it reinforces Abram's faith. Belief, and remember where we go in John, in the book of John, where it talks, all this is written so that you may believe. Right? And we're seeing this faith, and we're seeing this belief, and it starts in Abram. And belief is considering something dependable and acting upon it. It's confidence that something is true and acting upon it. Righteousness is the conformity to a standard, to what is right in God's eyes. Correct action and attitude before God. Abram accepted the word of the Lord as reliable and true and acted in accordance to it. Consequently, the Lord declared Abram righteous and therefore acceptable to him. So let's go on in verse 7. And he said to him, I am the Lord who brought you out of Ur and the Chaldeans to give you this land to possess. But he said, O Lord, how am I to know that I shall possess it? He said to him, so God, or Abram's kind of questioning, okay, I still don't have any children, and oh yeah, I still don't have this land, is where he's going here. But he said, so in verse 8, but he said, O Lord, how am I to know that I shall possess it? Then he said to him, bring me a heifer 3 years old, a female goat 3 years old, a ram 3 years old, a turtle dove, and a young pigeon. And he brought him all these, cut them in half, and laid each half over against the other. But he did not cut the birds in half. And when the birds of prey came down on the carcasses, Abram drove them away. Abram's second question, the first being the lack of children, now the second being the promised land. And now God lays out this plan of how he is going to assure Abram that this is true. So he's saying, okay, go get me all of these animals, and let's talk about this, right? So you see this coming. Verse 12 says, and the sun was going down, a deep sleep fell on Abram, and behold, dreadful and great darkness fell upon him. Then the Lord said to Abram, know for certain that your offspring will be sojourners in the land that is not theirs, and will be servants there, and they will be afflicted for 400 years. But I will bring judgment on the nation that they serve, and afterwards they shall come out with a great possessions. As for you, you shall go to your fathers in peace. You shall be buried in a good old age, and they shall come back here in the 4th generation, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete. So this God telling Abram, know for certain. The fulfillment is for sure, but first there will be a long period of enslavement. Remember Moses talking to the Israelites, and they're going to understand the 400 years, because they're standing after the 400 years in the desert for 40 years. Right? So they are understanding, okay, they understand how this is all working out. For Abraham to see all this history in advance probably was hard to understand. We talk about being blessed. So remember back in chapter 12, Abram was blessed so that he may be a blessing. And it's hard to understand because you see God telling him right here, your people are going to be oppressed for 400 years. Slaves in a foreign land. It was, however, helpful for Abram to understand it. Abram and his descendants would know that such oppression and enslavement was not a threat to fulfillment of the promise. It was part of the divine plan. So you think about these Israelites standing in the desert for going on 40 years as they're getting ready to cross the Jordan River to fulfill all of this. It was all part of God's plan. And the great faith that we can have in the promises of God because of his wisdom and understanding the plan. So let's go on into verse 17. When the sun had gone down and it was dark, behold, a smoking fire pot and a flaming torch passed between these pieces. On that day the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, to your offspring I give this land from the river of Egypt to the great river of the Euphrates, the land of the Kenites, the Kenizzites, and the Kadmonites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Rephaites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, and the Gershites, and the Jebusites. So Abram's standing here, and God's naming all of these nations, all of these people that are in the promised land. They're in the land that Abram's promised to get, but he's making this promise, this covenant with Abram as he finishes this scene. When with the darkness present, nothing else was seen in the vision except the fiery elements passing between the animals. God alone passes between these pieces because he alone fulfills the obligation. In forming such a covenant, the one who passed through was binding himself by symbolism under punishment of death to fulfill the oath of promise. The holy God would thus be zealous to fulfill his promises, notably concerning the land. Again, so you see this promise here of that he is making this covenant is about the land. Israel could be very encouraged by this guarantee at the Exodus as well as at subsequent times of distress by captivity. By his solemn covenant, the Lord guarantees his people that his promises will be fulfilled in spite of the prospects of death and suffering. So even though there's death, even though there's suffering, God's promises will be fulfilled. In response to Abram's request for confirmation of the child, right? What's really going to happen, Lord? And then you see this question of the land. The Lord specifically promised to give us innumerable descendants, again, and in response to Abram's request for the promised land, the Lord solemnly and symbolically ratified the covenant in the midst of thick darkness that signified the enslavement that would precede the fulfillment. So you see these promises, and we'll continue to see these promises as we work through. And yes, there are promises to Abram that are made to the nation of Israel, that are made to the seed, which is eventually through Jesus Christ. And And I kind of go back to just tying it all together from the beginning of the earth. You see the creation. You see this battle of good versus evil. And now again, I go back to God is revealing himself to the world through Abram. Right? And we continue to see that, and we continue to study that. And then the question again comes back to is how do we respond in our day-to-day lives to God's call to us? How do we respond? And it's a question that I know I need to ask myself more. I know that as the day goes on and the chaos comes around, is how do I respond to the love, the peace, the patience, the kindness, the gentleness that our Lord has promised even a wretch like me? So let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, we are just so grateful for this truth, so grateful for your word, Lord, and so grateful for the example that you have given us to help us understand that we can have faith, Lord, and be confident in your word and truth as we dig in and understand it even more. Lord, I just pray as we go this week that we may stand firm in the faith. We may be of good courage because of that faith, and we may walk worthy. We may take action with that confidence that we have in you. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Thank you, Dad. We all stand and please turn to 139, Great was thy faithfulness.
Is thy
be with us throughout, help us through this week, bless us, and help us have faith in everything you guide us to do. In your son Jesus we pray.
Did you have fun with Virginia? Uh-oh.
Didn't even see me coming.
Well, I consider that.
Don't get me. Don't get me. Oh, careful. Where you got that cup?
I take it at the end. He was
Yeah. I thought, it's not worth it to make him start crying. He might not go back the next day.
Yeah.
Come on, Dad. He's right there.
Did you
Yeah,
tell
it's good.
Virginia thank you?
She's like,
Noah,
well, why?
you tell
And I'm like,
Virginia thank you?
no, I just.
Love what you're doing with your hair.